And the Australian budget has axed the Australia network, which produces this program. The service operated by the ABC under a contract with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade is to have its current 10-year contract cancelled after just 1 year.
Last night's budget took $120 million from the ABC over the next 4 years, with nearly $40 million cut from the ABC's domestic operating budget. The ABC's Managing Director, Mark Scott, says that the government's decision to cut the Australia network, viewed in 46 countries, is disappointing and sends a strange message to the region. Mark Scott, welcome.
Thanks, Jim.
First question, international viewers will want to know this. Will there be any international television from the ABC now that government funding for Australian network has been withdrawn?
Well, it's under severe threat, Jim. The amount of money we have for international broadcasting has been cut by more than half. 20 million has been taken out by this budget. The ABC has in its charter an obligation to be an international broadcaster. We've traditionally done it on Radio Australia and on television. The television funding's been cut. So now the ABC management team and the ABC board has to investigate how we will be an international broadcaster with more than half our money gone. Now, it doesn't automatically mean that we won't be on television in the region, but Australian network as we know it will end. I received a letter last night from the head of Department of Foreign Affairs saying that this funding is cut. So Australian network as we know it will go. Whether there'll be any continuing presence for Australian television, for ABC International in the region, it's a little too early to tell yet.
So does that mean that if you decide, or the board decides, not to proceed with international television, that you will either ignore the charter or ask Parliament to modify it?
Well, Jim, there are different ways you can deliver international services, and this is exactly what we've been doing, and this is why I think it's a very disappointing decision by the government to cut this funding. Under a year ago, we struck a new agreement with the Department of Foreign Affairs, and we said the future of international broadcasting is targeting the rising middle class in the region, people who will do business with us, who will trade with us, who will send their kids to study here, who will travel here themselves. That's our target, and we were going to reach them through our broadcasting channels, through partners' broadcasting channels, and through online and mobile. And Jim, on all criteria, we are delivering on that. Audiences are up, tremendous partnerships in the region, great performance on social media. So we're on track. Now, if in fact the money has disappeared, we now have to work through how we deliver that service. But we're hopeful we can continue partnerships the way we've developed partnerships with MNC in Indonesia, with the Shanghai Media Group and other media groups across the region. We'll still have a social media presence, but we're keen to find a way for people with an international orientation in the region to be able to see Australian news and current affairs, to see Australian children programming, to see Australian drama. We've got to work through how best we can do that given this very significant funding cut.
Foreign Minister Julie Bishop has not said very much about the decision, but what she has said is this, that it is not cost-effective, or was not cost-effective in advancing Australia's interests in the Indo-Pacific. You say it was on track to deliver all agreed targets, quote unquote. There's a big gap between those two statements.
There is, Jim, and I'm very happy to engage on the facts and the substance of the matter around this. We spent $20 million on Australian network. That is far less than what 15 members of the G20 are spending on their international broadcasting. Singapore is spending $35 million on News Channel Asia. Japan, China, France, Italy, let alone the UK, are spending 10 times what we are spending. So value for money, and at the same time delivering audience targets, developing new partnerships, having an enormous impact on social media. The Minister has referred in her comments to a social media strategy. Well, I can tell you the way to get a social media strategy happening is to use a media organisation to deliver it. The Australia Plus English language page on Facebook has 1.7 million likes. This is one of the biggest English language pages around English language learning anywhere in the world. It's one of Facebook's biggest pages coming out of Australia. A tremendous success under any criteria. No, I just think a decision was made to cut this service. to be frank, there was not detailed consultative engagement with the ABC around this. There was not discussions around the table about how we could we save money, could we reconfigure things in other ways. It was not a detailed consultative engagement. I think a decision was simply made to chop the service. And in making that decision to chop the service, Australia flies dramatically apart from where most other countries in the world are doing it, most other members of the G20. They are spending more on international broadcasting, and they're spending more on international broadcasting in the Asian region. And so I'm bewildered, really, by the decision, and I don't think it's a good one.
Do you regard it as a broken promise, given what now Prime Minister Tony Abbott said before the election about not cutting the ABC?
Well, I don't want to get into the political back and forth on it, Jim, but I think the facts are pretty clear. Clear statements made before the election and after the election, including in Parliament, of no funding cuts to the ABC. What we are looking at now after this budget is $120 million going from our budget over a 4-year period. Most of that is Australian network, but there are other cuts to our domestic services as well. And I should add, the Australian network cut will have a domestic impact as well, particularly through our news services. Because some of our positions in foreign bureaus, Jim, are funded by Australian network. Some of the programming that Australian network helps fund, like this very show, goes to air domestically on News 24 and internationally. So our news budget will be cut by this decision, and so therefore we will have to lose staff and curtail activity on the back of this.
And does that mean that in general terms that the ABC's domestic audience, let alone the international audience, will get less coverage of Asia, the Asia Pacific, in what is supposed to be the Asian century?
I think that's an inevitable consequence. I think the way it looks to us today...
So what does that do then in terms of the government trying to prosecute its arguments for greater engagement with the region and encourage Australians to understand why these things are necessary?
Well, frankly, Jim, I think that's a question that needs to be put to the government, because I don't understand this strategy. For a $20 million investment, this was a marvellous investment in people-to-people diplomacy. We currently have a programming deal with MNC in Indonesia that puts Australian content on free-to-air television in Indonesia that reaches more than 100 million people. You can't think of a more powerful person-to-person engagement than that kind of media strategy with that kind of reach. And to be able to deliver that for $20 million a year, given the scale of the diplomatic budget, I think is a very small investment that delivers a very significant return. And I do think it sends a strange message into the region at this time that says we do not want to make the investment in the strategies that are really connecting with the people who should be the target of public diplomacy, which is the citizens of countries. You know, so we can spend money on the diplomatic circuit if we like. Australian Network was all about connecting with citizens in the region, and that's what we've attempted to do. And can I say, I think the expat community will rightly be very, very angry with this decision. They, you know, part of the ABC's charter is to connect with expats in the region, to bring stories from Australia. And that's what we've been doing through news, through drama, through our very popular children's programming. I've been travelling in the region in recent weeks. There's been disbelief from expats that Australian Network could be cut, and I think the government will hear from them as well.
Mark Scott, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim.